So I'd just like to tell you a bit about India, where I was because my dad was in the RAF, and we moved every 2 years. So I was born in 1945 in Leeds, and partition of India happened in 1947. And just before that, when I was about 1.5 years old, Dad got a posting to India. So he shot off to get the job started. And my mum and I followed on the Bathory, which was a ship that took weeks to plough from England to India. And when we arrived there was this stranger on the quayside, and he rushed at Mum and grabbed her and me. I was probably in her arms, and I was screaming because who was this stranger? And apparently, because I don't remember any of this, he gave me a green teddy bear, and that sorted me out and made me happy. But then the three of us moved to Delhi, went to Delhi and into the house in New Delhi. And all I know there is the stories of how my dad used to push me around in a wheelchair, not a wheelchair, in a pram with his stick, and it was a sword stick. And if we had been attacked, because it was tumultuous times, it was just before partition, and there was a lot of unrest and rioting and so on, he'd have had his sword in his hand, with his sword stick. And the other story that I heard was that he always drove the Muslim, because we had servants, because it was a colonial time in the 50s, in the 40s, it was colonial times, and we had servants, and he always drove the servants who were Muslims out of the Hindu area to make sure that they got back to their own area safe at night. And I don't remember any of that. But then, and the Brits were thrown out in 1947 when partition happened, but they were invited back again to help with the administration. And so my parents wanted to go out again because Mum had had such a lovely time chatting to the cook in the morning and saying what was for lunch and what was for dinner, and if we were going to have any guests or anything, and a bearer to look after the house in general and the staff, and also an ayah to look after the children. So it was a wonderful life, and we had ponies coming to the door to take us to school. This string of children going off to the international school in the morning, and when we got there, it only lasted till midday because it was too hot to be in school. So we went as a family then to the Delhi Gymkhana Club and swam. I spent most of the afternoon swimming, and I got a lot of earache as a result of that. But I remember the time we had a diving competition, and there was a diving when we had to get coins off the bottom of the swimming pool, and I was a very good diver in that direction, going downwards to collect coins from there. But there was also the diving from the boards, and there was the top board, and only the ladder going up to the top board was very, very high, and the top board as you walked out on the was very, very high. And as you looked down as an 8 or 9-year-old, short-sightedly, at what could have been water down there, hopefully, and then deciding, well, I am not going to go back down the ladder. I'm not going to go back down the ladder. So I'll have to go off the top board. So falling off the top board with my hands in front of me over my head. I'm just falling off head first into the water and being awarded a cup, silver cup, second prize, because there were only 2 of us in the competition. But anyway, 2 adventures from this house. We had sworn a pact with my friends that we would meet at their house, which was about 10 minutes walk down the busy road, down there, and we would meet at midnight. So I kept my clothes on under the covers, pretended to go to sleep, waited till the house was all quiet and everybody gone to sleep. And then I sneaked out of the house on a night in the middle of India and hurried in my little frock, a little white girl in a little frock, hurrying down the street with the traffic passing and pedestrians and hurrying down. And I don't know, you know, it was sheer luck that nobody stopped me and said, excuse me, where are your parents? But anyway, and I got to their house and we played this game we had made up, whatever it was. And then at the end of it, about 1 o'clock or something, they roused one of their servants, said, could you please walk Sue back home? And so he walked home with me to make sure I was safe. And I thanked him very much indeed, and was very sorry to have woken him in the night. But and then the other adventure was when there was a cat being tormented by a group of children out in the street, and I was in our garden and they were out in the street, and they tied a string around its neck and was swinging it round by its neck, and I lost it, and I do that, don't you dare do that, and I rushed at them, and they melted away, and the cat was traumatized, and I took the string off, and then it went away too. It just went away. They ran in that direction, it ran in another direction, and I was left knowing that I had the I don't know what it was, madness, that I had the ability to stop things being hurt. I had the commitment to try and stop things being hurt. And then a last little, I was on, we had a flat roofs, and in the festival of Diwali, where all the little lights are put round the flat roofs, and it's the festival of light, and my cat called Jumbaroo, a Siamese cat, and I sat on the flat roof surrounded by our own lights and looking out over the city with all the lights of all the roofs and all the peoples, and in the tower blocks and so on, and just the very peace of and the adventure of being in India as a child, and and the holidays in Kashmir in the houseboat, and paddling my little canoe amongst the lilies in the lake, and looking up at the Himalayas, and taking a pony and going up with a family trekking in the Himalayas. And Kashmir was such a beautiful country. It's a beautiful country, and this so much trouble has come after, but the beauty of the country is there. The beauty of India is there. We live in hope.
The main London to Penzance line. I mean, you know, and we did things in those days, you know, that perhaps parents wouldn't allow their children to do now, that we have maybe much more freedom. I would just, my mum would say, well, you know, go out, because there was nothing at home to do. There was no computers and things, apart from reading a book. I was the only child, so I couldn't play games with anybody. And my mum would just say, well, you know, go up to the park and come home at tea time. And that was it. We would just go off and come back when we were hungry. You had more freedom and independence. But nowadays, I've noticed with my own grandchildren that they were quite sort of old before they were able to go and buy something from a shop. They couldn't even do that on their own, you know. And I used to sort of cross the main road to get to school when I was about 5 or 6 years old. But nowadays, that's sort of frowned upon if a parent, you know, lets the child have so much independence. I think I appreciated having the independence because I was a bit of a rebel and I didn't like being told to do anything. You know, I always wanted to, I always thought I knew better, you know. So I think, yeah, my childhood, because my mum and dad didn't have a lot of money, but I think it helped the fact that we lived near the coast, because we could go and spend a day on the beach and it would cost nothing. There was always something to do in the summer. You could go swimming. You know, it was not like you lived in the middle of a town and there was nowhere to sort of go and enjoy a bit of free space. You know, so I think, yeah, I appreciate the fact that I had a lot more freedom than children tend to have nowadays. So yeah, on the whole, I think my mum and dad were good people. They did their best for me. And we went on quite a few holidays, you know, just cheap sort of caravan holidays to the seaside, but we couldn't actually afford to go abroad. But we did go on an aeroplane once in 1966 when I was about 7 or 8, and we went on a plane from Exeter Airport to Jersey. And I was really intrigued because all the names, place names in Jersey are all French names. And it was like being in a foreign country, although it wasn't. And I remember we went on this old propeller job plane, you know, one of these really old things. And I thought, oh, this is good, you know. And then we never went anywhere after that on an aeroplane. I don't know why that was. On an aeroplane with my father in later years when my mum wasn't able to go anywhere because she had hip trouble. So it was, yeah, it was, but we did have good plenty of adventures and things, and I had a really good park where, you know, I was just reading the little bit where it said about you made your own adventures. We had a really good park near where my mum and dad lived. I used to go there every day. I used to climb up the park wall and play cowboys and Indians and in the bushes and everything. It was great. And it was opened by the Duke of Edinburgh I think in the mid-60s. And there used to be a park keeper there that used to keep an eye on all the kids so they weren't up to no good. And then when I took my grandkids back years later to sort of on a bit of a nostalgia trip, it had all fallen into disrepair and it wasn't as nice as I remembered. And apparently everything went sort of a bit pear-shaped when they stopped having a park keeper. And I think that really helped in those days when you had a park keeper. But you don't tend to have one now in parks, and the older kids tend to vandalize everything, which is a shame for the younger ones. So yeah.
my main memories from my childhood home, from a little bit later in life, probably from the age of about 12, is being cold. And I don't remember feeling cold as a very young child. And I've got grandchildren now, and they can run around the house in bare feet that feel like ice, and it just doesn't bother them. So I assume that all children have this kind of inability to not be bothered by it. But I can certainly remember being about 11, 12, 13 and getting up in the morning. And before I went to use the bathroom, I would get my school uniform and tuck it into bed in the warm patch that I'd left and put the covers back over, so that by the time I was ready to get dressed, they'd at least lost that kind of frozen chill, which I don't know if my children, I hope my children don't have that memory. I hope I've kept them a bit warmer, but it was just the way things were then, before we all had central heating. And a little bit earlier than that, people have talked about making a tent over the washing line. And we used to have one of the big old-fashioned clothes areas that was literally just like 2 wooden gates. And my mum used to tip that over for us and put a sheet on it. And it was such a treat if we were allowed to eat in there. It was like our own little den. And she actually had that for years and years. And when I looked back on that same clothes area as a grown-up, I mean, it's not even that big. But as a child, you know, it just seemed like it was just our own kind of private space, like our own little mini house within a house. The other thing I can remember, and I can't remember what age it was, I mean, I must have been fairly young, but I remember I was the middle and the only girl. So I had an elder brother and a younger brother, and then mum and dad. And we moved house a couple of times, but we always had 3 bedrooms. So the boys had to share. Obviously, mum and dad shared, and I got whichever was the small room. And I just remember feeling this, my brothers were jealous because I had my own room and they didn't. And there was a 6-year age gap. So particularly the elder one, he probably would have loved his own bedroom. But I just remember feeling this massive sense of injustice because I was the one that was left on my own. I used to think, well, that's really unfair because mum and dad get to share and the 2 boys get to share, and I'm just stuck here all by myself. And I think in my mind, I thought that, you know, that they were talking all night and having fun and playing games, and I was just there on my own, all bored. So when I remember being really little and trying to get into other people's beds in the middle of the night because I felt really left out. And sometimes I was allowed in and sometimes I wasn't. And I left home at 18 to get married, and I remember one of my brothers doing the wedding speech, and rather than we've lost a sister and gained a brother-in-law, his speech was along the lines of we've lost a sister and gained a bedroom, because it was the first time that they could actually have their own space. And the other really strong memory I've got was Sundays in our house. My mum had a big top-loading washing machine with the old mangle, and she worked Monday to Friday, so Sunday was laundry day. And the kids, as we got a bit older, used to have a lie in. But I remember coming downstairs on a Sunday morning, and I mean, there was just this mountain of laundry. And as a child, I didn't think too much of it. It was just kind of, that's what mum does on a Sunday. But I mean, when I look back, she must have dreaded Sundays, you know, all this, it's the day of rest. It wasn't for her, because she would do all that washing in the morning. And then as soon as all that was out the way, she would cook a massive kind of family Sunday roast. And then when that was out the way and the dishes were done, she would then spend the rest of Sunday baking. So she would make pies, scones, quiches, biscuits, all sorts of things. They would all be laid on the table on Sunday night. That was Sunday tea. And then everything was popped into biscuit tins, and that was the food for the week. So very well organised, but, you know, I often look back, I've actually said to her, you know, you must have absolutely detested Sundays, because, I mean, she just literally did not stop, just cooking, cleaning, washing up and doing laundry for the entire day. And that's about it for my childhood memories of home.
Okay. Yeah, I'm the last or the youngest of 4, and there's a big gap between me and the other three. The nearest one is 13 years older than me, and they're all close together in age. So, so there was a time when everyone was at home. The other thing to say is, as I mentioned, my father died when I was 18 months old. So before I knew him, and I don't remember him at all. And after that, a couple of years after that, my uncle came to live with us. And so I felt that I was always kind of struggling for my mother's attention, which really is kind of not fair to say, because she was incredibly busy, as other people have said about their own mums, but I just felt that you know, he was taking her away from me. And so, you know, thinking about the idea of home as somewhere where you feel safe and kind of protected and comfortable. I think the only time I felt like that was when my uncle wasn't there, because I always felt that he was kind of impinging on you know, the family, really, I suppose. I really wanted it to be just my mother and me. Having said that, I remember when the house was full of people, so, you know, after people had left and got married and they were having children, they would come back for example, for Christmas Day. And I absolutely loved that. You know, all the noise of people talking and laughing, drinking, smoking, you know, the different feel of it and the different smell of it. And also the other thing was how squashed we were always. And that's something that's really different, because, you know, in terms of bedroom space, for example, I mean, I always lived in the same home until I left home at 18 when I went to university. So we never moved at all. It was a 3-bedroom semi in Sheffield. It was a very small semi, actually. And it only we were only able to accommodate everybody because I think there was never a time when everybody was there at the same time, because my brother did national service and then got married, and one of my sisters had already got married, but then she left her husband and came back again. And there was always this sense of kind of living really, really at close quarters. And if we all had a meal together, you know, we would, especially at Christmas time and so on, you know, the table would have to be extended, and every chair in the house, and borrowing from the next door neighbors this special seat that we always had to borrow. And in the end, it would just fill the whole room. You know, you could almost not get round the table behind anybody because we were so squashed in, which I just absolutely loved. We were always like you, I think, Sarah, you said, didn't you, about not realizing that you didn't have things that other people had. And I really could relate to that. And when I think back now about how shabby it was, really, and how nothing, you know, like things would last for years. Well, they'd been made to last for years, and you'd hardly ever have anything replaced, you know, like beds or furniture or whatever. But I spent a lot of my childhood feeling very lonely and very envious, because other children had what I thought were proper families, because they had a mother and a father, and they didn't have an uncle who was there instead of a father. Yeah, I'm just thinking about that picture of the meal around the table. I had quite a serious problem with eating or not eating when I was about 5 or 6. And so for me, the memories of eating at home were just absolute nightmare. And it was that thing of, you know, you'll stay there until you've eaten it and there's nothing else, and, you know, being forced to eat food that I didn't want, and just generally the tension and the kind of focus on me, you know, because I was like an only child, but not really, because I did have sisters and a brother, but they were all so much older. It felt like there was only me, really. And that thing of, you know, how can I play this game because there's only me? So, so always being short of playmates, I suppose. The tent in the garden with the old grey blanket, absolutely loved eating outside. I had a stool with an upturned tray on it as a little table to have my tea on, which was wonderful. And I can still remember the smell of damp when you were in that makeshift tent, you know, the damp blanket that was probably kept in the shed the rest of the year. I was really, really insecure as a child. And I think this whole idea of home, for me, home was my mother. It was my mother's presence. And without that, I didn't have any feeling of security or comfort. So it wasn't so much a place, it was her, it was her presence as a person.
In Canada, right in the center of Canada. And I was adopted at 6 weeks old. And my mom and dad had lost 3 children. And so I came into the family, and they already had adopted a boy, Hugh, who was 8.5 years older than I was. So I did grow up basically as an only child. And when I was a little older, when I knew that I was adopted, Mom and Dad said, well, we went to see all these babies lying in cribs, and we saw somebody with curly hair and blue eyes. We thought, well, we'll have that one. But of course, that never happened. I mean, that's not the way it happened. I got involved in sports at about age 10, and I continued and have done all my life. So mainly I was a badminton player and tennis player. But so this is, did I show the picture? No. So here's me.
Oh.
Can you see it? I don't know if you can see that. So that was when I was probably more.
Higher. Hold it higher up, Anne. That's it. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely.
And and then my christening, which is again back in 1941. With my dad, mom, and my brother, and the minister who did it, What do you say? Anyway, who organized this ceremony? Yeah. But we had a cottage at the lake in Ontario, and that's where I did in the summer. We spent most of the time there, and it was great. And I water skied and had friends, and it was a wonderful time. And it was my dad and my uncle actually built this cottage in 1954 in Ontario. Very extremely basic, all open, except for the 3-bedroom doors. I mean, the doors were there for the bedrooms, but it was an open plan and very, very basic, as I said. But what a wonderful time. We had no electricity. So what did you do at night? We played games and card games and everything. So I learned my dad taught me how to play cribbage when I was 7. And we played whist and all these card games. It was a wonderful time. And then in 1956, 2 years later, my dad died at home, and when I was 15. That was a horrendous time. And I can remember my aunt taking me out to find a hat for the funeral. I hate hats in the first place. And there were lots of people laughing. And as a kid, I thought, how could you be laughing? My dad just died, you know, and seeing everybody happy. But it was a wonderful upbringing. I just have nothing. It's just been fabulous. And other than that, I think that's it. So this was interesting. Oh, that's childhood. That's not really childhood. Well, okay, this is the cup that I won in 1957 as junior Canadian badminton champion. And this was 1958, this was taken. And I can remember sitting, oh, I don't want to have my picture taken with that cup because that might jinx me for the rest of the times I'm playing, but it didn't. And I won in 57, 58, 59, and 60. 1960 was, I turned 19. And so I'd won 4 years in a row, which apparently now is still a record. So I'd like to tell you about my adventures in New Zealand. And I got to New Zealand because teaching was too traumatic. The secondhand book business was too quiet. What was my third adventure? My third adventure was setting off to New Zealand. Plane to Singapore, boat to Perth in Australia, on the Kabaroffs, which threw its swimming pool out on the second day because it hadn't got any stabilizers. We'd taken on cockroaches. The smell of wash allied to cockroaches, allied to turbulence, finished me off. It was a nightmare ride. I swore never to go on board a ship again. Arrived in Perth, recovered, took the train across the Great Nullarbor Desert to Adelaide, down to Melbourne, Canberra, Sydney, out to Auckland, and joined my cabin trunk, which I had packed and sent off to my dad's old batman from the RAF, who had emigrated to New Zealand with his family. And there was my cabin trunk, and there was I without a job. So I then took the catalogue from the catalogue business at the secondhand book shop. I went to all the libraries up and down throughout New Zealand and said to them, would you like to receive these catalogues from the book business? And they will say, oh, how interesting. I said, and by the way, do you happen to have a job for me? And and off I went. And then when I was down in Dunedin, came a call from the Alexander Turnbull Library in Wellington, and they said, would you like to be, we need an acquisitions assistant. I said, oh, yes, that would be excellent. Thank you very much. So back there, found myself an apartment in a ground floor 4 apartment dwelling, which had mice and other such goodies. And but anyway, it's very interesting. But the trouble was that about 6 months in, there was a Commedia dell'arte course with 2 clowns who had been from New Zealand to Le Coq in Paris, and they came back full of the knowledge and skills and everything of Le Coq, and there they were in Wellington, and a course came up, a week-long course. And so I said to the Alexander Turnbull Library, please can I go on this course? And they, no, you can't, you've only been here 6 months. I said, I have to go on this course, I resign. So that was very quick. And so I went off on this course, and it was absolutely wonderful. Ah, joy. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. That's another story. Anyway, Tup Lang was on this course, and she said, I've just been involved in this modern dance company of New Zealand. We've brought in dancers from America with John Casserly, and we've teamed up with dancers from New Zealand, Gayleen and Piri Sia. And we need a tour manager. Would you like to do that? So I said, sure. And so off I went on my Triumph Tigress scooter down to Dunedin, where the company had gathered to rehearse and create a program. And so I lived there temporarily in the Globe Theatre, which was part of the home of Rosemary and Patrick. And they had this theatre attached to their home. And so I was involved in the shows there until the company had got itself organized. And then I set off on my scooter and went up the South Island ahead of them to Christchurch, and then out and up to Wellington and up through Hamilton and so on, and Rotorua and up to Auckland. And I went ahead of them each time and made sure everything was all right, and then sold tickets on the door, deposited the money, and on I went to make sure that the next place was okay. And it was a very successful tour. But at the end of it, there I was in Auckland, out of work again. So I came down on my scooter to Wanganui and got a job at the Four Seasons Theatre as an actress, and so was in actors' digs there. And then a job came up at in the new Centrepoint Children's Theatre in Palmerston North, which was just across from Wanganui, well, down on the cross. And so I said, yes, I would like to be the director of the Centrepoint Children's Theatre, artistic director. So then I found myself another apartment there, and that was very nice. Made it my own for 2 years. Now that was a long time, 2 years, and did various other things. Was I still at that apartment, or? Oh, I did. Oh, from there I did shows for secondary schools, and I did Who Am I and Where Am I Going, which was very interesting. And then I did 0 Hour and Other Stories for primary schools, and it was all a great adventure. And then my parents came out to visit, and I resigned, as one does. And I went up, well, things had gotten a bit dodgy there. I'd fallen out with the director of the main Centrepoint Theatre, and things were getting a bit unpleasant. So, all right, I've had enough of this. And pushed off with my parents. And and we toured. I showed them. We went right up to the Bay of Islands and down through Auckland, Rotorua, and so on and so forth. And then we went down to the South Island and ended up in Christchurch. And off they went to Australia to sell the ListerLogic maths for the infants level basic. What is mathematics all about? And my dad had created ListerLogic. So off they went with that to Australia, leaving me in student accommodation at the University of Christchurch with, I found a job helping with the Christchurch Arts Festival and so on. And I was also sort of administering the Maggie Burt Jazz Dance Company while I was at it. But then the holidays, the university holidays were coming to the end and the students were coming back. And I was faced with a choice of, am I going to stay here in New Zealand and try and find new job, new digs, new everything? Or I was feeling a bit homesick. Now my parents had gone. I thought, no, I'll go home. I'll go back to Sea Spray, Strandway. I'll go back home and look into the theatre in education, which had started in the UK. Now that sounds interesting. What's it all about? Actor teachers working together and calling themselves theatre in education. I'll go off and see I'll go back home and see what's happening. So I went back to Sea Spray and started off with my parents again in the family home while I looked for a job in England, in the UK. And that was my New Zealand adventure.
I left Plymouth when I was 21. My mum and dad still stayed in Plymouth, so there wasn't really any reason for me to leave. But I decided I wanted to go to London because I thought I would make a better life for myself. And I was bored with being in Plymouth because it's a lovely place, but I was just bored because everything was so familiar. And I don't think I would have gone to London if I hadn't had relatives there. I wouldn't have just said, oh, you know, I'm going to go to London and live there. It was because my grandmother lived there and I had other relations there, and I'd always been familiar with London because my mum had taken me up there on the train and the coach when I right from early childhood to see my grandmother. So I went to live in London. I didn't think the streets were paved with gold or anything like that, but I thought, you know, I would make a better life for myself. And my father disapproved because he said, oh, why do you want to move up to London for it? He called it the smoke. He said that he called London the smoke. He said it was a horrible place. It was full of pollution and not very nice. He said, why do you want to leave Plymouth? You've got everything you need here. You've got the sea and the countryside, and he didn't approve, but it didn't stand in my way. And so I lived in London for about 3-4 years, maybe, I think, and then I met my husband, and then I came up to live in Yorkshire. So I've always seen home as a sort of a base rather than something someplace I've got a deep connection with. But funnily enough, now I've been, you know, with the advent of the internet and everything, and Facebook, and I've got in touch with Facebook groups in Plymouth, my old school friends, and I've learned more about Plymouth and the West Country since I've moved away than I ever did when I was there, which is a bit weird. But then, you know, so I do keep in touch with things in both London and in Plymouth, although I don't have any relatives in London anymore because they've either all died or moved away. But I do try and sort of keep in touch with things that are going on in the places that I've used to live. So yeah, I tend to think, you know, I could really settle anywhere as long as I've got the internet and a bed and a chair and a wardrobe and I'm quite warm and well fed. You know, I think I could probably live anywhere as long as it's not cold. I couldn't ever go anywhere that was cold. Like my daughter's just come back from Finland for a few days and she said it was -3 and oh no, there's just no way I would want to go and live in a place so cold. I couldn't deal with that.
Probably the least travelled out of all of us. I've been in the same house now for 35 years. And I kind of hate it and love it in equal measure. It's an old house, so it's given me lots of grief with damp and leaks, and we had a horrendous house fire a few years ago, and I've clung on to it through various financial issues and divorces and what have you, but I can't imagine being anywhere else. I can't imagine moving to another city, never mind another country. And as much as I get really annoyed with this house, because it's a lot of responsibility, it's kind of big and old, and it takes, you know, even just keeping it clean is a nightmare. And I get really annoyed with it because nothing's ever as I want it to be. And, you know, in an ideal world, I would be all house proud and everything would be spick and span and gorgeous. And I get really bad house envy when I'm in other people's houses. I've got wonky floors and things. But everyone else who comes in, especially the grandchildren, just love it here. You know, there's just, they like the hospitality, they like the welcome, presumably they like being with me. So yeah, that's about it really. And what I was just going to add to that bit was all that was really confirmed to me when we were all locked in our houses with COVID. I've just never been happier. And I felt guilty at how much I was enjoying it, because I was kind of really conscious that that would not be the case for a lot of people. And I remember saying to my husband, like, oh, I'm so glad I'm locked down with you and not one of my exes, you know, because that would have been a nightmare. But yeah, just not having those kind of pressures to be anywhere, to get ready for anyone coming, having that sense of just being able to do things at your own pace. And, you know, there was not like, oh, mother's coming to visit, so we've got to get cleaned up today. It was kind of like, well, we've got all day to do that. And yeah, it was lovely. So that really sort of confirmed it to me, what an absolute home bird I am. And a lot of people have said there's been a few times in my life where I've been really quite poorly and unable to leave the house, and the number of people that are kind of, oh, you know, do you not get cabin fever? And I can honestly say I never have, not once. I've never felt the walls are closing in on me. I mean, I do go out for walks and stuff and I enjoy that, but if I'm in a position where I can't, it doesn't bother me. I'm really, really content. I've never once experienced boredom as a grown-up in my own home, not once. So boring, but happy.
Living in Winnipeg with my mum and my brother, I was really happy, and I went to university and then got a teaching job at high school, teaching French and PE. I was still living at home, as I said, and that's the time, 1966, that I met my future husband. We didn't know each other really well, but we were married in December 66, 28th of December, and the next day we were in Vancouver, starting our married life. He had bought a home for us to live in, I suppose. I didn't ever find it was a home, it was a house. It was not well finished. It was really just a house, and that we had rats in it and everything. He was a pilot, and in 1967, we moved to another house, which was much better. And I had 2 more children, so I had 3 children under 4. And I loved being at home with the kids. It was great. The neighborhood was wonderful. People who were married, people had no children, people were single, people had just pets. And it was a real mixture of people. And it was wonderful for my kids to grow up in. And I felt very much at home looking after them. But it didn't seem to get any better with my husband. I even thought of leaving the marriage because I knew he wasn't going to leave. So in 1989, I did leave the marriage. I found an apartment, which again was an apartment, but it was for me a sanctuary. It was a good location in Vancouver, and I got a job driving a bus, much like the Dial and Ride here. And eventually, in 1991, when we had the divorce, that allowed me to buy my home, my town home in Vancouver with my things. It was wonderful. I still can't believe that I did all this. But it was great. It was wonderful. It was my home, and the first one that I really felt comfortable, like my family home, which was wonderful.
I'm assuming you want me to say a few words about the next phase of my life.
Yes.
And if the last couple of years has taught me anything, it's taught me not to make a plan. I've always got my eye out for different houses because I would like something a little bit smaller. But other than that, I can't really see that a lot's going to change. I've still got an adult son at home that needs a lot of support. I can't see that changing anytime soon. I'm fully in the groove of being grandma, and I've got a teenage grandchild right through to a 5-year-old, so that's going to continue. They kind of, especially the little ones, they kind of keep that enchantment. And we're just more crafts, more books. I'm writing my first poetry collection at the moment, which has been a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, but once it's complete, I'll probably just be a glutton for punishment and do another one. I just see it. I don't think it's kind of this stage and next stage. I'm already entered into the next stage, I think. It'd just be nice to free up some money and some more time to just enjoy those things a bit more.
Landlord, I can't really say, well, I'm going to retire on such and such a date, because I can't do it. I can't retire unless I sell everything all at once. And I've still got 12 houses that I've decided I'm going to sell them whenever one becomes empty, so that it will be a gradual thing. and I'm hoping for the future I'll have enough funds to be able to carry on going on some foreign trips and seeing some nice places that I've never been to, and not have to worry about things from a monetary point of view. So things seem to be going along on an even keel at the moment, but it's anybody's guess whether they'll continue that way, because there's always one crisis after another, you know. So yeah, I'm just hoping things I'll be sort of healthy and not quite wealthy, but well enough off to be able to do the things that I want to continue doing while I'm still able to. I'm not ready for the retirement home just yet. My grandson said to me the other day, my eldest grandson, he's 15 later this year, and I've decided to join all these local clubs, you see, that, and I've joined up with the old ladies bingo club. And then my grandson said to me, he said, "Oh," he said, what are you going to the bingo for? Are you practicing for when you're in the retirement home?" And I said, "No," I said, it's all good fun. And I've joined up with the coffee mornings, because in our village at the moment, they've cut off the bus service to Doncaster. I can't even get to Doncaster anymore on the bus. So I've been trying to do things more whatever was going on in my own village, which isn't really that much, you know. So I've just been going to everything that's going on. They've started a book club up at the local pub once a month. We've got to read one of these Richard and Judy books that they recommend, and then comment on it when we go for a meeting. And I've joined up with quite a few things, just really to get out of the house, because I work from home. So unless I go anywhere with family, I don't really go out very much, you know. Trip to the supermarket is the highlight of the week. So yeah, I do tend to still keep an avid mind and keep an interest in things that's going on, you know. But I wanted to join a photography club in Selby, but it's on a Thursday, and I can get there, but I can't get back again on the buses. You know, I didn't want to expect my children to sort of keep giving me lifts there and back. You know, I don't want to sort of impinge on their social life, you know. But we do tend to do a lot of things together, and I do get out and about quite a bit, so I can't really complain.
Like to talk about now is the fact that Anne left Canada and came to England. And why did that, how did that happen?
Well, Sue and I came to England on one of our trips in '93 from Canada. We came from Canada and wandered around, came up to Yorkshire. And I was sitting on a rock. I think Paula knows this story. Sitting on a rock, and Sue went climbing. So all of a sudden I had this tremendous feeling of wanting to be in England. And I thought, what's happening? I mean, I'm not religious in any way. And yet here was this tremendous thing coming right over me. And I said, I need to be in England. Didn't know where that came from. And I told Sue when she came back, and we said, whoa, that was something. So we went back home in '93, and '94 we came again to England, but in the south. So we wandered around the south, and I still had this yearning to be in England, but not the south, only the north. So in 1995, sitting at home in Vancouver, I got from Winnipeg, I got the history of my biological mother and my biological father as dictated by them separately, because my father said his first sentence was he hoped that it, meaning me, would find a good home. So he obviously didn't know what she produced, because I think it might have been a one-night stand. So anyway, and then I had this history that my father was born in Northern England. So that's where that wanting to be here. and that my mother was Canadian born of Irish parents. So there was that link with Europe all along. I didn't know. So it was fascinating. So that's where that came from. And so in 96 we came. So then the trouble was that my dad had ended up in a nursing home in the south of England, and I was having an adventure being the artistic director of Theatre Terrific in Vancouver, and my dad was pegging out at back in England, and my partner, my life partner, was Canadian, and what was I going to do about it? So after this experience, and Anne said that she wanted to come to England, see if it, how it worked. So the Stonewall advised us to come over here first and then see what happened. So we arrived at Heathrow Airport with Anne's luggage, a large amount of luggage, and yes, go on. I was told by Stonewall, just answer the question. So, and I'm so thankful they told me, because I would have probably gone on. When they said, how long would you like to stay? Or how long are you staying? I'd say, 6 months, which I could. But then I might have gone on to say, I just want to see if I would like to live here. I wouldn't have gotten past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't need to, because she didn't say that, I didn't need to, she wasn't going to be deported at that point. So I didn't have to tie myself to any railings or phone the press. Whatever. So anyway, so we got through Heathrow and got a car and drove north and came to York. And I just sort of, where would I like to be if I'm coming home? Somewhere in Yorkshire. Anne said, right, somewhere in the north. I'd been born in Leeds, but York was always the lovely place, city that we came to when we wanted to have a nice change from Leeds. So we settled on York, and we rented a house. And tell about that. We rented a house with no
we saw it, we kept seeing, we stayed in a B&B, not a B&B, what do you call it?
Vacation
anyway,
flat.
When we first came, and we started looking through the newspaper for a place to, we had to have a furnished house. And there was this ad for Dunnington, and I thought, well, it didn't say York, so I guess it's a way out somewhere. Finally, I asked somebody, and they said, oh, Dunnington's a lovely village. It's only 4 miles from city center. I said, oh, okay, let's go. So we went, and it was furnished, but not overly, but enough. We didn't need any. And so we said, yes, we'll take it within 20 minutes of seeing the house in Dunnington.
But we didn't have.
No, I'm just getting back.
Okay.
But we didn't have an address. We didn't have a bank account. We didn't, what is something else we didn't have? And anyway, no jobs, but I could prove to them that I was getting money sent from Canada for the rental of my house that was furnished then. I was getting very good money for that, but transfer that to Britain, and it was it seemed a lot more less. Anyway, so that was, but so we stayed there for 3 years before we bought in where we are now. And when the people from Harrogate who were looking after it, it wasn't their house, but they were looking, I said to Jillian, I said, did you feel you were going out on a limb having us take over this rental of the house? She says, well, at first I did, because you didn't have an address, you didn't have a home, you didn't have anything. And but she said, I had a gut feeling. So she says, trustworthy. Yeah, and we did keep up the house and the garden and everything. So it never looked like a rented house.
But the thing is that after her visitor's visa ran out in 6 months, she had to put in a request for Paula knows this story, to stay. And she was turned down, and she was going to be deported. And that would have been interesting as well. But we never got there.
Unless we appealed through our solicitor with only 2 weeks, within the 2 weeks only.
Yeah.
And that was 1996. We came in 97. We're
In
hanging
May
around. I don't have a passport. What's happening?
Yeah.
And of course, it was conservative government that wouldn't recognize same gender partnerships. So that's why I had to leave.
Mm.
And then May 97, of course, Labour came in, and that same evening said, we will acknowledge and you know,
Same-sex
Same-
relationships, if you can prove that you've been together for the last 4 years. So we handed over the evidence and they said, right, well, you're now going to have a probationary year. So the cloud of deportation and is it going to work or not hung over us for yet another year.
and I
you
still didn't have my passport
And
back.
you
Didn't have it for over 2.5 years.
still got a passport. And so it was only after that year and we got, what's it called? Unlimited? No. Leave to remain.
Yeah.
Yeah, leave to remain, yeah.
Leave to remain. That we could actually look around to sell Anne's house in Vancouver.
That was 99.
In 99. And then we had the money to look round and buy a house here.
Mm.
That's when we found 37 Curlew Glebe, and that's when we settled in our own home. And this is what my sister drew and painted for us, is a little house with,
Oh,
and this is our first, our one and only, well, our first home. No, well, I'd lived with Anne in Vancouver, but this is the first home we bought together.
Well,
First home we bought together.
you did.
You what?
Never mind.
I did. I contributed. She's now saying she paid for most of the money out of the house, which is true. Anyway, so we're now living happily in Dunning together. And what makes it our home, dear?
The people in it.
Us. Us. That's what makes
And
it
a
our
home is not, a house is a house.
Uh,
A home has different feelings towards
Yeah.
it. About it.
I had a very good friend down in London. She died, unfortunately, when she was only 54. And I remember something she said to me when she was looking for a house in London, because we both worked at the chemist together. And she said, oh, I'm not bothered what it is. She said, because you can shut the doors, close the curtains, and you'll make it into a home the way you want it, you know.
Right.
That's it. And I think it's something about feeling safe. It's somewhere about feeling you can come home out of the hustle and bustle and you know that that's your home and that's your territory. There's your mug that you always drink your Ovaltine or your coffee or your chocolate. There's your, there's this, you've put your possessions around, you've got your own possessions around you. And they feel good because they're part of you, and you've got somebody with you.
Not everybody does.
Not everybody does, and so we're very, very lucky that we've got somebody there to share our home, and then that gives you that feeling of security. And